Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Chasing Lullabies. It's lovely to see you all online. Just to double check, can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Phantasmagorical. Okay, so this week we are sort of jumping a little bit ahead because I know we had a little break over Pesach and Bank Holiday, which has meant that we're slightly out of sync with the parashiot. So I'm trying to catch us up this week, that we will return to Parashas Shemini at a later point. However, this week I want to begin by discussing the parsha, the double parsha that we just read, which was Tazria Mitzvah. It's actually got a bit of personal resonance because it was my brothers, I've got two younger brothers. So the next one down from me, Aaron, it was his bar mitzvah parsha. So there was all the wonderful tension in the Landau household around this particular parsha, because as anyone who was in shul will know, it's a very long parsha. It's also a very complex parsha with all very minute changes in the way that it's vowelized. In any case, this week's parsha deals with something which it seems bizarre. It seems almost incompatible with our belief system, with our understanding of the world. It's the thing called tzaraat or tzaraat, and that's often translated as leprosy, though Samson Raphael Hirsch or Shimshon Raphael Hirsch proves, I think, quite nicely that this can't be the biological form of leprosy, because last time I checked, leprosy doesn't afflict a person's clothing and it doesn't afflict the walls of a person's house, whereas tzaraat does. So it must be some sort of spiritual leprosy that looks a little bit like leprosy when it's afflicting one's skin, this sort of whitish, yellowish lesion. It might change the hair a different color, but at the same time, it also afflicts the walls of one's house and the clothes on one's body. So we dealt with this a little bit on Friday, but I want to open up this concept in a Chasing Lullabies way. So let's see what we can do about that. Now, remember, the standard thing, I think, that we're taught as kids when it comes to tzaraat, the basic thing, and this is what my daughter came home. She's in year 2. She's in a relatively from school, but she came home and this is what she said. So she said, people get tzaraat when they speak lashon hara, when they speak badly about other people. And so the way to rectify tzaraat is there's a special purification process. Now, she didn't go through the whole process, but just to give you the full picture, not just the Children's Digest version, which is you have to bring 2 different birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, a hyssop plant, and you dip it all in blood, and then you kill one of the birds, you send one of the birds away. Okay, so it just sounds a bit like a scene from Macbeth, really. When shall we meet again? But in any case, so Yiska came home, our daughter came home, and she said, sorry, Suzanne, I said there wasn't going to be any blood. There's only a tiny bit of blood this week. Seriously, there's only a tiny bit of blood. Okay, so anyway, so Yiska came home and said, do you know why we have the birds? It's because, and this is based on a Rashi, who himself I think is based on a Medrash. So he says, well, because, birds, they go cheep, 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 cheep all the time. And that's just like what happens when people say lashon hara, when people say nasty things about each other. They go cheep, cheep, cheep. And that's why we have that process of of purification. Is that enough? Is that all right? We'll just leave it like that. Okay, fine. You speak lashon hara, you get this skin disease, you cheep, cheep, cheep like a birdie, you kill a bird, send one away, bits of blood, hyssop, wood, done. It's clearly not enough. So let's just take a look at some of these words, these laws. Take a look at some verses, some text, and try and find if there's a deeper story, a more powerful story, a more fundamental story when it comes to tzaraat. Once we do that, and we're going to spend most of today's session, if not all of today's session, doing that, we are hopefully going to expand out our presentation of the laws of Leviticus. These laws, which are all to do with, which we've been learning about until now, the sacrifices. So we're going to expand out our appreciation of sacrifices and these laws of purity and impurity, and hopefully take a grander view of what's going on through the weeks that come. Okay, let me share screen with you and share some text. So this is not the one I want to share with you, but I want to share with you. Can you see my screen with text on it? Yeah. Can you see any text? Yeah. Okay, great. So the text over here, that was in last week's Parsha, double Parsha, Leviticus 14, 4 verses 4 to 6. It says, "Then the Kohen shall order, and the person to be cleansed shall take 2 live clean birds, a cedar stick, a strip of scarlet and hyssop." Okay, so the priest shall order, and one shall slaughter the one bird into an earthenware vessel over living waters. As for the live bird, he shall take it, and then the cedar stick, the strip of scarlet, and the hyssop, and along with the live bird, he shall dip them into the blood of the slaughtered bird over the living waters. So he's even dipping the live bird into the blood of the dead bird before sending off the live bird. Sorry, Suzanne. Okay, so we've got 2 birds. Those are the verses. That's the purification process. So we've got 2 birds. One is killed. Its blood is made to drip into a pool of clear water in an earthenware vessel. So it's filling up and making this bowl of water all red. Then a priest takes the live bird along with a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, and a plant called a hyssop, and he dips it all into there, and he sprinkles it, more sprinkling. We love our sprinkling. So he sprinkles it onto the person who's got tzaraat, and at the end of this purification process, the person who's afflicted with a spiritual leprosy can come back into the camp, but they still have to wait outside their home for 7 days. So initially, once the person's got leprosy, the spiritual leprosy, they're sent out. This process allows them to come back in, but then they still have to wait 7 days before coming home. So here's the question, and this is the question we're going to open up this evening with. It's going to be a really interactive session, hopefully, as normal. And the question is, where have you heard of this before? Where have you heard something in the Bible, a process involving wood, hyssop, blood, something that should live and something that should die, when afterwards there's a 7-day period in which something has to be kept outside one's house? Any takers?
Pesach.
Pesach.
Yeah.
Yes, Pesach.
Last plague.
Last plague. Okay, so last plague there was blood because there was the Paschal lamb. Well, was there hyssop?
I think so.
Was hyssop, yeah. Hyssop.
Put it on the doorpost, yeah.
Doorpost, that's wood. So there's hyssop. There was blood on the doorpost. That's wood and doorposts. Something that's going to live and something that's going to die. So that could be the firstborn of the Jews versus the firstborn of the Egyptians. But we'll see also another option. And a 7-day period of keeping something out. What would that be? 7-day period of keeping something out of the house for Pesach? Fantastic. Okay, so let's have a look. And by the way, there's one other clue that is leading us there. I mean, Jonathan's already jumped us straight in, which is amazing. But there's one word which is used to describe tzaraat, the affliction of this spiritual leprosy. The word is called nega. Okay, so nega, nun gimel ayin. So that word means an affliction or a plague. And before tzaraat, before this idea of spiritual leprosy, there's only one other time in the whole Torah that we use this word nega, a plague. Guess where it is? So it's in the plagues of the 10 plagues of the Exodus. So here we go. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. God says to Moses, Od nega echad avi al paro. Another plague, another affliction I'll bring onto Pharaoh, v'al Mitzrayim, or onto Egypt. And after that I'll send you out from here. When he sends you, he'll completely drive you out of here. Okay, so we've got the plague, that the word tzaraat, so the spiritual leprosy of tzaraat is described as a nega, it's described as a plague. And the final plague of the 10 plagues is called a nega. It's the only other time that this word nega appears in the entire Torah. Okay, so that's one comparison. Now, the other comparison we talked about, so we've got the plague of the firstborn in Egypt and the plague of tzaraat. Are there any other connections? Well, the word azov, the word hyssop. Does anyone know what hyssop is? Hyssop's this little bush, right? This little bush that has sprouting flowers, sprouting leaves. So where else do we have an azov, a hyssop? So we're dipping it into blood over in that story, just as we're dipping it into blood in our story. And here it is. in Exodus 12:22. Ulekachtem agudas ezev, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop, utvaltem badam asher basaf, and dip it into the blood that's in the basin. This is the blood of the Paschal lamb, the first ever Paschal lamb. V'gatem el mashkoif, and you shall put it onto the lintel, the shtel mezuzos, into the two doorposts, which are made of wood, probably. Min hadam asher basaf, from the blood that's in the basin. V'atem lo seitu ish Pesach beisad boker, but you shall not come out of your house until morning. Okay, so we've now got connection 2. Connection 1 was it's called a plague. Connection 2 is that there's a blood dipped in hyssop. Okay, so that's very interesting, isn't it? The only
Rabbi,
way
on that
Yes.
point, this is where someone shouldn't go out of their house. So, whereas with the tzaraat, you have to go out your house.
That's true. There's another connection to the house part, but the tzaraat, in terms of coming out your house, that we'll see that you can't come back for the chametz. But you're right that there's a slight difference. There is a slight difference. Well, not a slight difference. It is a difference in the sense that the person with tzaraat, who is, we'll see in a moment, is sent away. They are an exile, so they are sent out of their homes. Whereas here, this is keeping them safe within their homes. It's true. However, what you could argue, therefore, is that this process that the person who has tzaraat is going through, this person who has spiritual leprosy, the process he's going through or she's going through, that's in order to help them return to safety. That in as much as they have been sent away because of their spiritual affliction, this purification process is allowing them, as the means to return them into the community. And so too, the process that the Jews went through in Egypt was a process of bringing them into greater safety, because Hashem was going to look after them and take them out of Egypt. So that would be, I think, the comparison, but there are deeper comparisons as well. So I will give that the initial answer, and then let's see if we can deepen it as the evening progresses.
Okay.
What else? So we've got 2 birds, one bird which is alive and one bird which is dead. Is there any other time? And the way that is sort of viscerally presented is that one bird's blood gets spilled into water and the other bird is dipped into the water and then flies away. Do you ever have an imagery of, in the Exodus story, of one set of people whose blood, so to speak, is spilled in water, and another set of people who come out of that water alive? Rena, you're talking, but you're not mute. You're not mute. Unmuted.
Yeah, the Red Sea, crossing the Red Sea.
Absolutely, crossing the Red Sea. Fantastic. So here we are. Whoops, the daisies. And the Ashuva Hamayim. It says in Exodus 14:28, the Ashuva Hamayim, and the waters returned. And they covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire force of Pharaoh, coming after who are coming after them in the sea. There wasn't even a single one of them left. However, we know that the Am Yisrael survived. The people of Israel survived. So, what is the comparison? We've got negah, the word of plague, which is again only used when it comes to the death of the firstborn. We've got hyssop. We've got wood of the doorposts. We've got people living and dying, as we talked about in the context of the splitting of the sea. It all points to the idea that we are somehow recreating the Exodus when it comes to, we're somehow recreating the Exodus when it comes to the world of tzaraat. And that is actually commented on by Nachmanides. Nachmanides, on a long piece that he's got in last week's Torah portion, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. He says, now the laws of Mitzvah, the laws of the afflicted house, and the contamination from a human corpse are related. And he wants to note that they resemble the Pesach in Egypt. This is somehow it's a recollection of that situation. Oops, so the question now is, the $1 million question is, what does it all mean? What does it all mean? By the way, there's a little bit more. There's a few more connections. Another connection is that when it comes to sending away the live bird, the language is V'shilach es hatzipor achaya. He will send away the live bird into the field. It's the same language after the 10th plague, which says Yishalach eschem mizeh, that he will send you, Pharaoh will send you from here. You send away the live bird. You send away the Jewish people into the desert. Okay. And there's the final finale over here. One more share screen of this particular text before we move on. The final finale, which was for 7 days, the person who is returning to the camp has to wait. They have to wait. This is me getting my source sheet. They have to wait. And when else do we have to wait for 7 days? So it already mentioned that the 7 days, matzos techelu, eat matzah. Ach bayom harishain tashpisu se'omer batechem. On the first day, you shall clear away all leaven from your houses. Because anyone who eats leaven, their soul will be cut off from Israel from the first day until the 7th day. So that's the final connection, is that the 7-day period that the person who's afflicted with tzaraat has to wait mirrors the 7 days of chametz being kept out from our home. It's almost like the Metzoras, the person who's afflicted with tzaraat, their purification process is a mini exodus from Egypt. It's almost like they are reliving the exodus on some personal level. But why? What does the Torah try? What are the Torah trying to do by reconstructing the purification process of the person afflicted with tzaraat in a way that it models the exodus from Egypt? Any ideas? Why do you think this is happening?
Still, we were at the wrong Madrega level prior to coming out of Egypt, and somehow it pulled us. The Exodus pulls us up from the lowest to the highest.
Right. So we've got this idea of tzaraat, and sorry. So 1 second. So therefore, you're saying just as when it came to the Exodus, I'm doing like a bit of Gemara voice. So just as when it came to the Exodus from Egypt, so we had to be pulled up from a low level. So too we're being pulled up from a low level. Now that might be the case, Jonathan, but I'm wondering if there's something even more fundamental about what the Exodus offered us in terms of what it was teaching us, what it was communicating to us, that might be relevant to someone who's afflicted with tzaraat.
So it's something to do with the creation, which took 7 days, and the laws of Sheva, where you sit Sheva for 7 days.
You're right, Francis, that the magical number 7 has many iterations, has many forms within our scriptures and traditions. That it's not just there are 7 days of Pesach, there are 7 days of Sukkos, there are 7 times 7 when it comes to the counting of the Omer. There are lots of 7s, but I think again we need something a bit more connected to the concept of Exodus, possibly. I'm going to lead us there in a moment, but anyone else want to hazard some thoughts about the connection between the purification process of someone who's got a spiritual disease called leprosy or tzaraat, spiritual leprosy, and a mini exodus and an exodus from Egypt? So I think that maybe the best way to do this is to collect some more clues about what spiritual leprosy is all about. Why would we get it? And what does it seem to indicate to us? What does it seem to show? So let's gather some more evidence on our investigation of chasing away the lullabies of Tazuri Metzora of tzaraat. So the first thing is that tzaraat, this idea, is introducing us to a part of the Torah which many of us find not only tricky to understand but also difficult to relate to. And maybe I'll present it in my own way. By the way, most of the sort of the core material for tonight comes from alepbeta.org, Rabbi Foreman's website, as we often use it in the past. It's an amazing resource. Some of the presentation, of course, is my own. So let me offer you a little bit my own personal presentation for the moment, which is one of the times that the laws of purity and impurity become something of tension, something that needs to be explained, is when Shoshana and I are teaching a chatan and kala, a bride and groom, before their marriage. Because one of the things that we would like to encourage a bride and groom to consider, at least, or to be open to, is that the bride and the groom on the day of their wedding should go to the mikveh, and please God that the bride should be interested in continuing to engage with the laws of family purity which are, I think, they're a fundamental part of Judaism. And so we have to get over some of these stereotypes and some of the barriers that many people have, the sort of the misconceptions that people have about the laws of purity and impurity, often simply because of mistranslations. So I'll give you an example. The words purity and impurity, tuma and tahara, they're often used even to describe something like a non-kosher animal. So in older English, more traditional English translations of thou shalt not eat of a behemoth tameh, of an animal which is tameh. So the way that it's often translated is an unclean animal. An unclean animal, which starts to get into all sorts of stigmatizing presentations around what it means for, let's say, for a lady after she menstruates and becomes a nidar to have to go to mikveh, she becomes a nidar, which is a status of tumah, which is a status of this word called tumah, sometimes translated badly, translated really badly, translated as unclean, sometimes translated as impure. It starts to create all sorts of stigmatized language around these things and makes a person feel dirty or wrong. And of course that makes no sense, because if you look at the source, some of these sources of tumah, something like menstruation is just a natural process. Something like childbirth, which was at the beginning of this week's Torah portion or last week's Torah portion, which it began, Parshas Tazria began with the law of someone who gives birth, and then she has to go to the temple or the tabernacle to give an offering and to go to the mikveh and to become tahor and to become what we will maybe translate as pure, but again it's a bad translation. Because, by the way, why is pure and impure a bad translation? Because we don't really know what it means. The idea of impurity is the absence of purity. What's purity? Purity means not being impure. It's very difficult to get a good dictionary definition of the word pure and impure. It's simply the absence of the other. So we have to have a better understanding of what these laws do, and also I think destigmatize some of these things. It's in no way suggesting that natural bodily processes of menstruation are dirty. I mean, and also, like, why would you say that giving birth is a dirty process? That's the most natural, beautiful process in the world. As my midwife colleagues often remind me, that giving birth is not, we shouldn't pathologize it. It happens to be that it occurs in a hospital where most people who go to hospital are unwell. There's nothing unwell. You're not sick if you're pregnant. You're very healthy. It's wonderful. It's a natural process. It's risky, but it's not a sickness. So why would you call it impure? Or why would we call the results of birthing impure? In order to do that, this is, by the way, a slight digression. I just want to clue us in a little bit. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of this answer. Is that there is something which is described in rabbinic literature, and I think as the Avi Avos HaTumah, the granddaddy, the big daddy, the Avi Avos, the dad of the dad, the father of the father, the grandfather, the big grandfather of impurity. Does anyone know what the Avi Avos HaTumah is? The grandfather of impurity is the paradigmatic source of impurity in the Torah.
Is it mace?
Yeah, so it's, as Jeff says, it's a dead body. A dead body is the granddaddy of impurity. That seems to be revealing to us something about what impurity is about. That will say, again, in someone else's language, but I think it's a nice language, that when a person engages with, when a person has a brush with their mortality, when a person engages with a vacuum of life, whereby there's no life present for one moment, that brush with mortality creates the status called impurity, called tumah. And the reconnection to wholesome mortality, whereby I'm not, or to wholesome life, a reconnection to life is called tahara. So does David unmuted himself? I just wondered if wanted to comment. Okay, so anyone's comment, please comment. Why, by the way, so how does that work with someone who's menstruating or someone who's had given birth to a baby? So someone who's menstruating, so they had an egg within them that could have given birth, that could have become a life. That's what happens every single time a lady has a period, is that there's a possible life. The life, if there's a period, that means that the life wasn't able to become, for whatever reason, the life wasn't able to become, to fulfill its potential, and therefore it's deposited because the egg is no longer viable. As my mother-in-law likes to take told us that when she was, that's the thing in my wife's family, is that when she's pregnant, when my mother-in-law is pregnant with Shoshana, she's really pregnant with Yiska as well. because a developing girl has all the eggs inside her that she'll ever deposit. So actually, Yeska was inside my mother-in-law as well, because as Shoshana's developing inside my mother-in-law, so that's Shoshana's eggs are also developing inside her, and that's just a natural process. But when the possible life of the egg comes out, so then that's a brush with mortality. It's a vacuum where there could have been life and there wasn't life. The same thing now. How are you going to explain that in the context of a woman giving birth? So I think this is very, very interesting. That, of course, giving birth is creating life. So how's that a brush with mortality? How's that a vacuum of life? So I think that as far as I'm aware, like I'm a man, so men are always going to get this wrong. But as far as I'm aware, after a lady holds a child inside them, so even though they've given birth, they've created life, there's a little loss. There's a little loss after the baby comes out, because for 9 months you've nurtured something within your own body. You've felt every movement. You're so in tune and in sync with that being. And so now that they've come out, the life has been created, but your body was 2 lives, and now it's only back to 1 life again. Your body was nourishing 2, it was a whole, and now something has come out, and therefore there is a certain vacuum whereby there was once an expanded presence of life. We were 2 inside this 1 physical body, and now there's only 1. So once again, that requires a reconnection with life again. That vacuum of life requires a reconnection to life. How do we reconnect to life? Go to the mikveh. What does the mikveh represent? The mikveh, we're unclothed, we go into this water, we're immersed, we're entirely covered, there's no barrier between our bodies and the water. It's like the amniotic fluids. You come out, you're refreshed, you are ready to reconnect with life once again. You've had a brush with mortality, a brush with the vulnerability and fragility of life, and then you reconnect to the full value of life, acknowledging that vulnerability, acknowledging that fragility. Okay. Within that context, tzaraat has an interesting place. The world of tumah and tahara, the world of spiritual leprosy has an interesting place. I'll just pause for a moment. By the way, that's what I would share with my chatanim and kalot, my brides and grooms, that we'll teach, is that we will sort of debunk that myth very early on in teaching, because I think it's an important myth to debunk. But does anyone want to come in at that point? Because I know I just sort of dumped some information. Okay, so where does the world of spiritual leprosy feature in the world of tumah and tahara? We'll use these words of purity and impurity. So we know that we said that the great granddaddy, the big granddaddy of impurity, is a dead body, such that even if a person is in the same room as a dead body, so you're in a massive room, dead body's right there in the corner, you're just in the same room, you become impure. That's why when there's a hospital which keeps halacha, like Shaarei Tzedek in Jerusalem, if there's a dead body on that floor, so they announce over the intercom there is a dead body on the floor, that any priest who's on that floor can get out, because a priest is not allowed to become to come into contact with that level of with that tumah, with that impurity. So there's only one other source of impurity, that if you're in the same room as them, you're not touching them, you're not having any contact with them, you're not having contact with something that they had contact with, you still become impure just by being in the same room. Do you know what source of impurity that is? That's spiritual leprosy. If I'm in the room of the same room as someone with spiritual leprosy, so then even if I don't touch them, and they don't touch me, I don't sit on something they sat on, I still become tamei, I still become impure through my common presence in that room. So already we're starting to hear that the concept of tzaraat, the concept of spiritual leprosy, is connected to the idea of death, the idea of death and purity. Does anyone want to suggest any other similarities between spiritual leprosy and death? Either halachic, or story-based, or physical.
Absence of contact with other people.
So that's an interesting part. So we'll get there. But yes, so a dead person, per force, can't have contact with other people. It sort of comes with the territory. So Werner's right that there's an isolation around death, and maybe this is a good time to speak something out there. that the Talmud in Moed Katan compares a person who's got spiritual leprosy to an excommunicated person. Well, that sort of makes sense because they're sent out, but also to a mourner. So this is taking Werner's idea and sort of inverting it. The Talmud connects the person with spiritual leprosy to a mourner. What might you see as a similarity? Right now, a mourner is mourning over the loss of someone else. Why would the person with leprosy be like a mourner? In what way, essentially, is a dead person like a mourner? So it's all about perspective taking. So this is how Rabbi Foreman puts it. He says he was talking to someone he was very close to who was dying. And the person who was dying had a very different outlook on the situation as opposed to the people who were surviving. I've just been having a close relationship with someone who's got a close family member who's dying. There are other people here, I'm just acknowledging, other people here who've had very significant bereavements recently. Now, from our perspective, the people who are going to be left behind, let's say, so then we become mourners because we are saying goodbye to one person. But from the perspective of the person who's dying, they are mourning the loss of everybody. They're losing everyone, so to speak, because they're all those relationships that they had. Well, mourners mourn the loss of that relationship with that one person. The person dying mourns the loss of relationship with everyone else because they won't be able to have that relationship anymore once they themselves have passed. So it's very interesting to think about this idea of separateness. That's why I think what Werner was coming on to, this idea that a mourner, that the idea that a person who is a Metzora, a person who is sent out from the camp, is radically separated. And you can look at radical separation from two different perspectives. It's the same idea, whether you're radically separated because you're still living and they're dead, or you're radically separated because you're dead and they're still living. Either way, there's a separation between you and everybody else. That's what the death state is. It's the separation from everybody else. And that's what the person with spiritual leprosy has. They have a fundamental disconnection from everyone else. Other connections with death. So if you think about the actual features of tzaraat, the whiteness, the paleness, of a person's hand. So if anyone's ever seen a person who's passed away, a body who's passed, a body like a corpse, so that you'll know that the whole color is gone, and the skin is clammy. It's white like death. And this is borne out in the Torah's own description of the only person who we know was afflicted with tzaraat in the Torah. Who was that?
Miriam.
Miriam was afflicted with tzaraat, and she is described by Aaron like this. So we said already it's a white spot on the skin of his flesh. We already know it's this white death-like spot. So here, but now in the book of Bamidbar, so the cloud departed from above the tent, and behold, Miriam was afflicted with tzaraat as white as snow. Then Aaron turned to Miriam, and behold, she was afflicted with tzaraat. Aaron said to Moses, "Please, Master, do not put sin upon us for acting foolishly and for sinning." And they're talking about the stories that they shared, or that they were thinking around Moses, that they were speaking Lashon Hara about Moses. He says, "Al not tehi kames," let her not be like a dead person. She's like a dead person with this tzaraat. So the Torah itself describes tzaraat as being like a dead person. So four different connections. One, the impurity, the level of the impurity of tzaraat is so intense, it's the same level of impurity as a dead body, such that if I had a dead body in this room and I wasn't touching it, I'd be impure. So too, if I had a person with tzaraat in this body, I'd be impure just like a dead body. Two, it actually physically looks like a corpse, that white affliction. Three, the way the Torah describes tzaraat, the way that Aaron describes his sister who's afflicted with tzaraat, is that she's like a dead person because of this. And finally, the actual way that the Talmud describes it, the Talmud categorizes someone who's afflicted with tzaraat, a mourner, and an excommunicated person, wraps them all together because they all are radically separated from the rest of the community. Okay, I think with this new information about what tzaraat is, that tzaraat is a radical separation from everybody else, we can now finally return to the Exodus. And what we're essentially saying is that someone who has tzaraat, you could argue they're partly alive and partly dead. You could argue that the individual part of this person is doing just fine, but the communal part of themselves has been cut away, has withered away, has died. The metaphor that might be helpful here is if you were to go to a liver cell in the body and you'd say, what are you? So, the cell could say, well, I'm just a cell. I'm a great cell. I've got a cell membrane. I've got some DNA in my nucleus. I've got a few mitochondria knocking around, a few bits of mRNA, quite a hot topic at the moment, other lysosomes and other bits and pieces and other cell apparatus. That's what I am. I'm a wonderful cell. I'm a self-contained individual. So that would be a story the cell could tell. But of course, that's not the only story, because that cell is part of a family. It's part of a group of cells within the liver. It's part of a community of cells that construct the whole liver and do all the functions of the liver. So on the one hand, as an individual, yeah, it's a cell. But on the other hand, as part of a community, it's a piece of a liver. But then you wouldn't stop there necessarily. You could ask the liver, what are you? You could say, well, I'm a liver. I do all these different tasks. But then that wouldn't be the sole way to look at the liver. That's an individual. That's what I do as an individual. I'm a liver and I do this and I do that and I purify the blood, I think. But you could also say, well, I'm one of the organs of the body, and we all make up the different functions of the whole body. So then you could ask the person, the body, what do you do? Well, you say, well, I'm the body, and I allow this human being to function, and this allows the human being to breathe, to excrete, to move, to sense. Yeah, that's what we do. But of course, that's not true, because the human being is made up of families or relationships. And then again, you could say, well, the relationship is part of a community, and the community is part of the whole world. So there's all these different multi-level structures within which we arrange ourselves. And someone who is radically separated from the community, they might be alive as an individual, but they're dead to the community. They've lost everybody. They're sent out. They're in excommunication. They're mourning. They themselves have a part of them which is dead. Now, they're not physically dead. They're not dead as an individual, but right now, they're not part of this group. They're an out group member, and that's their death. How do you fix that? How do you resurrect your communal self? By the way, why would it be appropriate to have a representation of your communal self dying? It's because the thing that brought on this tzaraat is an antisocial sin. The sins that rip societies apart are not whether you keep Shabbat or not, and not whether you keep kosher or not. Those are things which are up to the individual. That's the individual's religious expression. The things that rip societies apart is when we break down our relationships, when we speak evil about other people. The Talmud also says that someone who's extremely haughty, that's also one of the sins that might lead to tzaraat. So when you lord it above other people in a way that is not fitting, in a way that is self-aggrandizing, using other people for your own benefit. Those are the things that break down societies. And that's why, therefore, tzaraat is the death of the communal self. So how do you bring the communal self back to life? So at this point, I'm going to open up again. Why would reenacting the Exodus from Egypt, why would having two birds, one living, one dead, wood, hyssop, blood, why would this mini Exodus rite, R-I-T-E, why would that help us bring our communal self back to life? What do you think?
What I don't understand is why the person who's suffering from leprosy doesn't have a role himself in getting himself cured. I mean, there's no talk of repentance here at all. It's the priest that's putting the blood on.
So that's a great question, but I think the process itself is a penitent process. You get sent away. You have to be by yourself. You're not allowed to be near anybody else. You're forced to think. You're forced to experience the loneliness that you created through ripping apart society with that evil language. You have to contemplate what you've done. That itself is a penitential process. I think you're only going to be coming back with those sacrifices because you are penitent of heart. So that I think that this is the pathway to it. The priest is just a facilitator of that, because he's the one who administers.
Is it to do with recognizing that, you know, redemption from Egypt, coming out from a very bad place of slavery into freedom, and that was God's doing, and uniting the people as a people, recognizing God and recognizing their spirituality, if you like? Is that the connection?
So you're saying good, Rena, but I'm going to encourage you to say some more. So what was created on the night of Pesach? What was brought into being?
The recognition of miracles, of God saving us, of the fact that we could be saved, that we became a people.
I'll stop you there, Rena. We became a people on Seder night, the first ever Seder night. Just checking if I've got that piece of text to share with you. Yes, here we go. Let me share some text with you about the command for Seder night. So here we are. Sorry. So it says in Exodus 12:21, Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said, Mishchu, draw forth, ukchu lachem, and take for yourselves tzoin, the Passover lambs, lemishbechoseichem, according to your families. V'shachatu Pesach, and slaughter the Passover sacrifice. You've got to take it according to your families. Now, each family smeared the blood on the doorposts. That's what happened. However, after they walk through the doorposts, something else happens. They emerge, joining families together into community. They started off as individual units, everyone in their own homes, all the homes scattered around Goshen or where they were in Egypt. They come out and they become community. They become a nation. A nation is born that night. That's right, Rena. That's why sometimes some people say happy birthday on Seder night, because it's the birth of Am Yisrael. It's the birth of the people of Israel. So initially, before Seder night, we were all just families. We were tribal, right? You've got this family and that family. Everyone is a subsection of this tribal structure. Now we become a nation. So therefore, of course, the Exodus is the remedy that the Metzora needs, that the person who's afflicted with the spiritual leprosy needs. They've lost their communal self. They've destroyed their sense of community, of nationhood. Why? Because their sins were all about dividing the nation, breaking people apart. And so they reenact the Exodus to reenact what it means to be part of a nation. That's their rectification. Okay. Time to take it for one more level of depth. Okay, so for anyone, any thoughts, questions, or comments? So just to say so far, part one, we said that there's some connection between the laws of spiritual impurity, the laws of impurity, spiritual leprosy, some connection between the laws of spiritual leprosy and the Exodus. Part two, we said, well, what's this? Why would there be such a connection? We had to appreciate what this spiritual impurity was all about. It was becoming dead, becoming separate. Separate in what way? Dead in what way? Dead to our communal life. Why are you dead to your communal life? Well, you're thrown out. You're thrown out from the community. You've lost everybody. It's radical separation. You might be physically alive as an individual, as the cell, as the liver, but you've forgotten that you're part of something much bigger. How else could you speak in such a way? How else could you, it's like the liver sending poison to the heart. You would only do that if you don't think that you're connected to the heart. What's it? Chopping your nose off to spite your face. That's the idea. You wouldn't hurt someone if you recognize that they were brother, that they were part of this big nation. So we have to go through a process. Step 3, we have to go through a process to reenact what it means to be a nation. When did we become a nation? The Exodus, and therefore we reenact the Exodus when it comes to the rectification of the person afflicted with spiritual leprosy. And here's the final part of the puzzle for tonight, of course, at least. Up until now, we were looking at what it meant, what this nega, this plague meant in the context of the community. But what about the individual as well? There's another level of symbolism and imagery. There's another level of textual connection that is going to, I think, be important over here. Because this word nega, this word affliction or plague, which is used to describe tzaraat, was used to describe a particular plague of the 10 plagues. We mentioned it earlier, and I'll just bring back that verse now onto the screen. So here it is. And Moses says, this word nega used to describe over and over again spiritual leprosy. It says, Moses, God says to Moses, I'm going to bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. And what plague is that? That's the plague of the death of the firstborn. It could be that there's something fundamental about the plague of the death of the firstborn that teaches us about tzaraat. What is that? What's the clue? So the clue could be in the way that tzaraat was described. That Aaron described his sister as being like she was dead. She's dead, but there was a greater description of that. He doesn't just say stop, but saying she's like she was dead. If you have a look over here at the bottom, the verses from the Midbar, it says, I'll not, over here, Biadini, please master, verse 11, I'll not teishdalin chatas, do not put sin upon us for acting foolishly and for sinning. So now verse 12, here's the important verse. Al not he kames. Don't leave her, don't let Miriam be like a dead person. And this is a very difficult imagery, very kind of gripping imagery, and it's sad. Like a dead person that comes out of its mother's womb, with half their flesh consumed. The language that is being used over here to describe someone who is afflicted with tzaraat, someone who is afflicted with a spiritual leprosy, is not just someone who is dead, but it's someone who's stillborn. It's a miscarried fetus. They never made it out of the womb alive. So this is the final part for tonight of the imagery of tzaraat, this idea of, on the one hand, stillbornness, and on the other hand, birth and life. When else do we have where for some there's birth and for others there's stillbornness? Let's consider the Israelite experience on that night of the 10th plague, the night that we know has a textual connection to spiritual leprosy. It's called nega. That 10th plague is called the plague, the nega. That's the same language which is used to describe tzaraat. So God instructed the Israelites to paint blood around their doorpost, to paint it on the doorpost, to paint it on the lintel. They've got blood surrounding the entire frame. And they're all shut together in this constricted location, the house. They're all bunched up together in the house. And they're eating a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is actually bound together. The sacrifice is bound together with the arms and the feet all held in like this. What's the imagery? A small opening surrounded by blood. People stuck together in a house. A sacrifice which is all bound up. What's the imagery? The imagery, Jonathan?
Birth.
Birth, absolutely. It's the imagery of birth. That when the people of Israel come out of that doorway, they're being born. This is exactly what Rena was saying. This is the birth of a nation. It's not just a sort of a metaphor. It's not just an idea out there in the ether. There's a very visceral birth representation, birth symbolism in people coming out from a bloody entranceway, from a constricted place into an expansive place. That is the experience of birth. That's the perspective of Am Yisrael. That's the perspective of the Israelites. Put yourself in the perspective of The Egyptians. What's their experience? No one's coming out of their houses. The children are staying, the firstborn are staying in the houses because they're dead. They're not coming out of the womb. They are still born. Now, we don't celebrate the downfall of our enemies. We're just comparing symbolism. We're just comparing symbolism. Whilst for the Jews, for the Israelites, there was an experience of birth. For the Egyptians, there was an experience of miscarriage. Now think about it. Actually, this symbolism goes further. Who are the firstborn? The firstborn, the idea of a firstborn is a fascinating idea, but the firstborn are the way that a nation communicates itself to the next generation. The firstborn are the interface between the parents and the rest of the children, because they are the ones who all that parental effort goes into. They're the ones who have to model what the parents do for the next generation. So if you want to consider how you birth a nation, you birth firstborns. You birth the future because you birth the interface between the past and the future. You birth that present, that generation or that group of people which are going to take the parents and communicate it to the next generation. How do you therefore uproot a nation? How do you end a nation? You take away their firstborn. That is the idea over here. So two nations are waiting to be born. They're all inside their homes. Everyone's inside their homes. And we don't know who's going to get born tonight. Who's going to continue, who's going to perpetuate themselves as a nation. And it's here we have to look at a very interesting set of verses. And with this we'll conclude this evening's presentation. I am in slightly further up, sorry. So, the first thing we said was already that Pharaoh arose at night and all his servants, all the Egyptians, there was a great outcry. We got that, but I want something slightly different. Up here at the top, there we go. So this is at Exodus 11:4-5. This is what God has said. At the dividing point of the night, I'll go out into the midst of Egypt. And every firstborn in the land of Egypt, umes. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt, literally, we translate it as will die. Now, if you actually wanted to say will die, would you say umes? Anyone who's a grammarian? I'm looking at my mother-in-law possibly. So what would you you can unmute yourself, Mummy. So what would you say is the correct grammatical form over here? You wouldn't say umes. Umes means and all the firstborns are dead. They're already dead.
Yamut.
Yamut, absolutely. So Yamut kol bachor. So they should all die. They will all die. That would be the correct grammatical form. Somehow we are testifying that there's already death here. They're already all dead. Why are they all dead? Surely the Yamut, they will all die. So this means that there's something that we could learn over here, not just on the communal level, but also on the individual level. It's almost like God is saying that to justify your existence as the firstborn, you have to fulfill a particular task. The task is be the appropriate bearer of a legacy into the future. Be an individual that can correctly carry the mantle of the past into the future. Otherwise, you're already dead. Retroactively, umes, you're already not alive. Because you were stalled in the womb. You were miscarried. Your whole purpose as a firstborn, your whole raison d'etre was to continue into the future something good, something wholesome, something productive. And so for Am Yisrael, for the Israelites, what's the potential of these firstborns? The potential of these firstborns is to take that courageous move as individuals, to paint the doorposts within the context of your family, and then to go out and be the future by taking the messages of the past and instilling them through the present into the future. You are now going to be born. I'm going to retroactively justify your existence, not just as a community, but also as an individual within that community, fulfilling your task. So too, we say to the Egyptians, you're already dead. Why? You're already dead because your existence cannot be justified. Umeis, you're already dead. We are just bringing up to speed physical reality with a spiritual situation. So the Pesach offering is the device whereby we not only birth a nation, but we also birth individuals ready to dedicate themselves to the Almighty, ready to dedicate themselves to their task within the context of Am Yisrael. If you want to take it back to that metaphor of the liver cell, we are birthing healthy liver cells who can live for themselves as productive individuals in the context of the overarching organism. Someone who has gone through the situation of radically separating themselves from the community, someone whose their communal peace has died. It's almost like they were stillborn. They negated that part of themselves, because they can profoundly reattach themselves to the nation by saying, no, my existence was justified from the beginning. I'm going to exit that house. I'm going to go through that birthing experience. And in so doing, I, as an individual, will choose to be a productive member of the community as well. Thank you so much for chasing away the lullabies with me this evening. We went through that final stage to show that not only have the similarities of the tzaraat, not only are the similarities of the purification ritual for the person afflicted with spiritual leprosy, not only do they mirror the exodus from Egypt in a manner that teaches us about returning our communal selves from death, but they also teach us something about our personal role within that world. That each member of the community has to be productive. Each member of the community has to give of themselves to be both the most productive individual within the context of the whole. And that is what it meant to come out of those houses in Egypt, to commit ourselves as individuals to be healthy, productive individuals in the context of society. And with that, people who have ripped apart their communal self can repent, as Jonathan said, and can reaffirm their commitment to themselves and to each other. Thoughts, questions, and comments?
Do we assume that Miriam also went through this process with the birds?
Yeah, that's right. So the whole community, they didn't wait. They waited for her while she was in isolation until she purified herself, and they were all waiting. So we see that in the book of Bamidbar.
So it's just an observation, really, and that is tzaraat is white. Yeah, it's a white spots. And I know we talked about death, giving the appearance of death, but if it's white, isn't that associated with purity? So is it kind of like converse that it's something that is indicating impurity? White.
What color would you choose for impurity? Normally you could choose black, I suppose. Black or red, yeah.
Just an observation.
Yeah. So I suppose it's healthy white and unhealthy white. I mean, the other thing is that white,
off-white,
off-white, but also white is otherworldly. It's not of this world. So you could take that both ways. It's
Isn't there the converse being that blood being life, and all this talk of dipping things in blood and so on? Blood symbolises life. I mean, when somebody is white and their skin is white, the blood isn't flowing.
Absolutely.
So that's the other side of it, isn't it?
Yeah. It was a very messy time. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. We also say when someone is colloquially say whiter than white, you say you're whiter than white. I don't know, we can have a good discussion about white. But
white, yes. White is pure, and white as a sheet or is the other way. So
yeah.
Does this link into the red heifer at all? Sprinkling the ashes of the red heifer? Somebody that's...
So there's lots of sprinkling in our purification rituals. I'm not sure whether this is directly linked, or other than the fact that they both require sprinkling, but almost everything has a bit of a sprinkle when it comes to purification or atonement. So I think that's about applying something to something else. That's the way that we do it. But I'm sure
the
there's
whole experience about going out and getting ice cream with the grandchildren, they want sprinkles, is going to be quite a thing, really.
well,
If only I could go out with the grandchildren. That's
there
all.
you go. I mean, yeah. Okay, everyone.